Hope everyone is very good tonight. A few people logging on now. So tonight we'll be digging into I Sing the Body Electric by Bradbury, which is one of my favorite authors. This is not my favorite story by him. So if you like this, I would strongly urge you to pick up either one of two things. Either go get my favorite novel of all time, which is Something Wicked This Way Comes, which essentially is the kind of prototype for every kids engaging with supernatural sci-fi danger where the adults don't believe them and go on an adventure. So everything from Goonies to Stranger Things, that novel essentially is the prototype for how those plots work out. The other thing is The Illustrated Man, which is a collection of short stories, which I think are some of them is fabulous. And I was happy they picked Bradbury. I was a little disappointed they didn't pick one of the amazing stories from there. So, big fan of Ray Bradbury. Happy to talk about I Sing the Body Electric tonight. So go ahead and as you are coming in, go ahead and jump on the chat. Let me know where you're from. What team? If you're a coach, that'd be great too. Let me know. Always interested in who logs in on these things. Just FYI, all three of the recordings of these sessions, once I'm done with this one tonight, I will be able to sit down and edit those and get those posted on the Texas Academic Decathlon YouTube channel. I should get those up before the end of the month. That's kind of my time frame right now with working through those editing them so that, cut out all the, as earlier, the audio issues we had and little mistakes like that. So nobody wants to listen to that again. So, yes, and if for some reason the chat isn't working, let me know via social media. You can also jump on our social media right now and oh, good. I just saw the first chat coming through. So now I know that the chat is working, and always happy to have the coach from Adobe here. I see I think I remember this correctly, see your posts on social media. So as we're getting people logging in, go ahead and jump on social media on Instagram or Twitter and go ahead and answer our poll tonight. Is how you read this story. You could kind of read this story two different ways. Either as something very dark, kind of disturbing at times, to something more light and friendly. I don't know, maybe it just says something about you and your personality, how you read it. I find myself finding it light at times, but also very dark at others. So go ahead and jump on social media and answer our polls there. So without further ado, let's dive into I Sing Body Electric by Ray Bradbury. So start with the basics, the characters. These are characters you will need to kind of keep track of for the lit test. We have the father, who is a rather minor character there. It's really just involved in the initial setup of why we are in the situation we're in, and then at another point later on in the story where they are having a meal together. We don't get a name for him other than father. And then we have the children. We have Tom, we have Timothy, and we have Agatha. Whereas Tom serves as the narrator, Timothy is the next youngest, and with Agatha being the youngest. And of course, probably the biggest roles are obviously the narrator, Tom, and Agatha. Agatha is kind of the pivot point of the story as we go through it. She's also acts as the conflict in the story because, as we'll see, Tom and Timothy are quite pleased with the addition of grandmother. Agatha is not. And of course, then we have Grandma, the robot, essentially the machine, who acts as their grandmother throughout the story. And then we have another very minor character, Guido Fantocini, and there's discussion in there of that meaning, Fantocini, which the description that the story gives, or the Bradbury gives us, is not exactly translated specific or directly. Um, it's more just puppets or small children. The etymology of that word in the Italian language it also means kind of a small child or puppet. Just the idea of something small and diminutive. Um, the Guido Fantoccini, it's interesting about the character is that in other stories, I think Ray Bradbury makes a bit more of that kind of character. This one kind of falls into the background. You barely even notice him, other than a few little sly comments he makes, some interaction with the children. But his other stories, this kind of character tends to come out more with personality. So I found that interesting. So, um, and so those are the characters we need to keep track of as far as remembering for the test. Now, I did want to stop briefly and look at the poem that uh, the story derives its name from Walt Whitman. Uh, and if you haven't looked at this poem yet, at least the first part, we got a whole house full of Dobie people here tonight. I'm happy to see Dobie here. Um, Remind me, where is Dobie? What part of Texas? But anyway, going back to Walt Whitman, I'll wait for someone to answer in the chat. Going back to Walt Whitman, he wrote a poem that the story derives its name from. So let's read through it. If you haven't read through it, I think it's good just for inspiration, kind of understanding something. You also see some probably interesting connections between these first couple of stanzas. I just put the first couple because there's no need to go through the whole poem. But I sing the body electric, the armies of those that love and girth me, and I girth them. They will not let me off till I go with them, respond to them, and discorrupt them, and charge them full with the charge of the soul. Was it doubted that those who corrupt their own bodies conceal themselves? And if those who defile the living are as bad as those who defile the dead? And if the body does not do fully as much as the soul? And if the body were not the soul, what is the soul? And I love the fact that he pulled the inspiration to the title of this in the connections of the poem, because there is a part of this story where they do get into what essentially is grandmother and what makes her real or not. We also get this idea of the armies of those I love and girth me, and I girth them, the connection to the people we love. Obviously, this is a story of loss and dealing with grief. They will not let me off until I go with them, respond to them. That I kind of have this connection with them, the people I love. And so there's a wonderful connection here. If you want to read the whole poem, I would suggest you do. Well, it isn't another favorite of mine. Go look, and I think you'll see, if you go read the entire poem now, if you've read the story, you'll see lots of interesting little connections as you go through there. So, yes, thank you, Pasadena ISD. I should have done that. Well, good. I look forward to hopefully meeting the coaches at training day in Houston next month. So, all right, let us take a look at the recurring themes, the recurring elements in this story. One of the things that I hope you picked up, and is one of the really strong parts of the story, is how it makes technology very natural. It's not the harshness of technology that we typically get with robot, automaton type figures or stories where there's lots of mention of metal and machinery and gears. Instead, Ray Bradbury tries to make grandmother, while yes, a machine, very upfront about it being a machine, presents her as being very natural. You have all these references to bees, head tracks on their sarcophagus. There's all this discussion of wood and the texture of the wood. We have the spider element of her where she has the kite flying with the web coming out. This discussion of the rabbit on the walls, the linen covering. Everything is done to kind of pull back this idea of her being quote unquote artificial. Or machine-like. And so I think that's one of the great things that Ray Bradbury does with this, is that rather than giving us a pretty standard view of a robot or machine, which he's written stories about, he has other stories about, the type of typical robot. This one is almost feels organic in a sense, and that I think helps us probably endear ourselves to the grandmother character even more, uh, and as well as understand why the kids kind of endear themselves to her, at least two of the three, or less. Uh, and I think that's a really interesting element of that characterization. And of course, obviously, calling her grandmother rather than a nurse or a nanny or even mother. I think if you tried to say a mother figure, like we would have, the reader probably would have been repulsed by that a little bit. The fact that we're replacing a dead mother with this uh, machine uh, version of that. But a grandmother, it's we always just want to feel nice and warm towards her. So it's a trick of the wording, but also a trick in the writing of how he characterizes her. It makes her feel very natural throughout the entire story, connected with the natural world. The other thing that is a recurring element through this that you should be paying attention to as you read it, and as you go back and reread it again to study, is what is grandma? What is she? Now, again, she's a machine, but what makes her up? And there are places within the story, and we'll talk about it today, that she speaks to this, what makes her up and what makes her essence. And then the last thing that's kind of the undercurrent throughout the entire story is the processing of grief. And essentially, well, some people might have heard, well, what is this story about? And say, oh, it's about a robot grandmother. It's really not. It's about processing grief. It's about a child processing grief. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute as well. Kind of those elements that we go through. Dealing with grief and how do we replace grief, but also how do we deal with it, etc. So those are the things that you should have picked up as we go through it. If not, think about these three things as you go back and reread it as you're studying for the test or the many tests that are coming. All right, so let's walk ourselves through the plot elements to make sure we're all clear about the story and what is involved here. So kind of the first thing that we're introduced to after this scene and kind of bringing grandmother to life with a huge crack. I love this kind of evokes creation, a crack. You can almost think of like a lightning. The three children are basically responsible for creation, which is an important aspect as we get to it towards the end, who grandmother is or what makes her up. But we essentially, after that very quick couple paragraphs there, we get the idea that our mother is dead. Okay, so we start with very clear and direct. And we get this question of who will care for her. Will it be the aunt who clearly seems unfit and neither father nor the children want anything to do with the Aunt Clara? We don't really get anything specific why that is. We're just very clear they're not that. So basically, it is a single father, three children, and oh, what shall do? Then you're introduced to the fettuccine brochure, and the children read it. One of the things that I hopefully you also maybe noticed in this is that Ray Bradbury writes this in many ways very childlike in both the dialogue, but also sometimes in the construction of paragraphs and the way things are described, because this is coming through the perspective of a child. And so things are kind of dumped in a very childlike manner at times. That's one of Ray Bradbury's strengths. When he is writing from the child's perspective, he's very good at kind of giving you that carefree but kind of disjointed and kind of all over the place feel within his writing. So hopefully you pick that up. So we get this brochure that goes through, and we slowly are given the clues of what this brochure is for. And we get the line, we've perfected the first humanoid genre, mini-circuited, rechargeable, AC/DC Mark V electrical grandmother. And I love every one of those keywords in that description, because it does seem like something you might see listed on Amazon today. And it's that keyword at the end, grandmother, that they cue on to, like, wait, what? what is it, grandmother, and then there's discussion of toy and everything else. It's just they go through this kind of discovery of that this thing exists. Then they go and visit the factory and they pick out the hair and the eyes, and the different children get to pick out different things, her voice. They do all the customization. They're on this trail, this moving carpet through I guess, the showroom or factory. And then Mr. Fantocini is leading them through there. Um, it's a very short scene. If this was a novel, I would imagine more like a almost Charlie and the Chocolate like Factory figure, Willy Wonka figure, leading him through this very disturbing puppetry uh, factory making replaceable grandmothers. So yeah. And then we get the wait. The kids say, "Oh," the narrator says, "You know, they're genius. They made us wait. They kept waiting. We kept waiting and waiting until we couldn't stand it anymore, and then eventually it arrives." And hopefully, you noticed the funny way things are delivered, and people are delivered as like helicopters, which is one of my favorite things about sci-fi is the little things that are just so completely off of what reality actually is in the future that we all are going places by helicopters. I guess things being delivered with drones is actually pretty interesting. Comparison there, but yeah, it's helicopters. So we get the arrival and in the very elaborate unboxing, the crowbar prying with the wood grate. Um, we get the allusion to a coffin at one point that the narrator is very happy that Agatha never saw the pine box coffin, that she wouldn't make that connection. However, we'll find out in a minute that she did anyway. Um, and they unbox her and they unwrap all this linen about its very sarcophagus, Egyptian mummy like, and everything else. And then they're presented with this grandmother. And then they have to wind her up. And Agatha gives over the key, they wind her up, and all of a sudden she comes to life. And so the grandmother comes to life and she engages with each child. And then, of course, we discover that Agatha is hesitant about it. She doesn't quite. She's off back behind on the porch, kind of hiding back now that the grandmother's come to life. Um, and then the children spend time. Agatha stays. She's with them through their little adventures of the next few days and weeks and time. But she kind of stays off to the side. She doesn't engage with the grandmother as much as the grandmother tries to engage her. But she's patient. She's loving. She keeps messing up her name to be playful with her. I could imagine a test question. By the way, I have no drill over test and no knowledge of that. So I have no special insight with that. But I could imagine a question. Which of the following did the grandmother never call Agatha? I feel like that might be a bit of a nitpicky question, but hey, it's state or nationals, who knows? Did grandmother misunderstand Agatha's name on purpose to get Agatha's attention, or just to be funny? I think a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. She's being playful throughout the entire time. It very much seems from that very first scene when grandmother engages with each of the three children that she knows how to engage them and get their attention quickly and endear herself to them very quickly as well, to connect. Not in a forceful way. This doesn't, at this point, isn't really creepy that she's trying to get them to like her, but in a more playful way. That she's very specific to each child, what they need, which you see actually throughout the story. She's very purposeful in how she deals with each child. Then we get the wonderful discussion at lunch or dinner. I cannot remember which one, but lunch or dinner, about you ask what I am. So we're going to go in a little bit more depth here in a minute about what she is and what constitutes her. And it's a great moment where Bradbury doesn't do the typical robot replacement for a person darkness, although I still think you can read the story as very dark. darkness of typical. And really, humanity's relationship with technology here is also very interesting in that passage. So I would pay very close. And we're going to talk about it here in a minute, but pay very close to that. And then we get where Agatha unleashes, and this is where we figure out really what's going on with Agatha. That it's not that she hates grandmother, is that she hasn't really dealt with her grief, and that she's very angry. Uh, that leads to her running in the house. That leads to the accident where grandmother saves Agatha, and Agatha thinks that grandmother has died. We get that kind of realization, a further realization, really, of Agatha and her understanding of death and her anger. And we also get, hopefully, you read this full over, that grandmother doesn't die, that she robot got hit by a car. Fix myself. I'm kind of indestructible. I will always be here. And that is ultimately the benefit that the robot has that a human being doesn't, right? And then we get the kind of the coda afterwards. So this is probably the most unusual part of the story is the happily ever after part. You could have just ended that story at that point. But Bradbury adds this little coda onto it where there's this great moment where basically grandmother says, well, I'll go away to there and I'll be split apart and the parts and everything else once you're old enough and everything else. And but then she's like, well, you could pay an extra fee and that felt very modern. They add on charge for the tech to have that you have to add on to kind of keep it long term. And that the grandmother essentially will take care of them in their old age as well, because she will always be there. Someone just asked, what would be the significance of the grandmother suddenly changing her face to match the faces of each of the children? Yes, we're actually going to talk about that in a second. I love that when I got to that the first time. It was like, oh my God, this is so prescient to Ray Bradbury. One of the things you'll notice, if you will go and read Ray Bradbury, you will notice just how wonderfully prescient he is about so many things that eventually occur in technology, in our understanding of human psychology. It's just, yeah, the man was just a genius. It's one of the things why I have such a love for Ray Bradbury. So, but we will talk about that. Do not worry. So, all right, so let's talk about some key moments in the short. Now, I have a printout page numbers, which I think is from the actual collection. But if you want to follow along on your version of the lit guide, you can pull that up right now. If you want to look at kind of the full context of that, you absolutely can. You can just do Control F and find the passage that you see on the screen. And taking a look at that first, where it's right after they've gotten the brochure. And Timothy says, how great, said Timothy. It makes it sound as if we were to keep bees, educated bees. Before that, they're reading the description where it says, knowledge of religious, artistic, and socio-political histories of the world, seated in her master hive. So you get the reference to hive, you get the reference to educated bees. It's a wonderful reference and use, because we think of the way we think of bees and hive is not through individuality. And so from the very beginning, we're kind of set up with this idea that grandmother is part of some greater hive, not an individual, part of some collective. Now, what's interesting is later on, we will find out, yes, she is part of collective, but not in the way we normally sense. If you're a Star Trek fan, maybe the board or something, where you're an automaton in a hive and you have no control. But where we see it later is, and we'll talk a bit more in a second, is that part of the hive is in this family, this collection, that all her knowledge and experiences kind of derive from the experiences in life of this family. And so no, she's not an individual. She is a collection of this family's experiences, which is really interesting. The next thing I thought was really interesting is just shortly after that, which is another part of the brochure which says, we do not sell our creation to able-bodied families or parents unavailable to raise, affect, shape, change, love their own children. Nothing can replace the parent in the home. However, there are families where death, or ill health, or disablement undermines the welfare of the children. Orphanage seem not the answer. Nurses tend to be selfish, neglectful, or suffering from dire nervous afflictions. One of the reasons I love this is because no company today could we imagine that would say, no, we're not selling our product to, we're only selling it to certain people. No company would do that. But in Ray Bradbury's story, this company actually does. We're not selling it. If you're an able-bodied family, you can raise your own children. You need to raise your own children because a family is the most important thing. But if you have lost a parent, if you have ill health, or you've been disabled in some way, this is better than an orphanage. This is better than a nurse, which is also an interesting part. That nurses tend to be selfish, that a machine is better than a human nurse. That should offer its own little discussion in hopefully your active team rooms about machine like grandmother versus human nurse. Which one do you think? But I think that's a great moment about this company and this world building where we've established that the family is the most important thing. And you need to do that. You need to do this in the story. Otherwise, the end part of the story doesn't work because in the end, we find out that the family is the most important thing. It's what drives the grandmother. The other little line, whether or not the fact is from Mr. I never remember, Fettuccine, where they're talking about the puppets and everything. And he says, we shall see what we can do to eliminate the strings. This idea that this kind of goes back to the puppet aspect, the individuality element of grandmother, of how dark do you want to read this story? Kind of confirms how dark you read this quote. We shall see what we can do to eliminate the strings. Because it comes out of nowhere, first off. It's the man behind the desk that turns out to be Mr. Guido Fettuccine. That is very interesting kind of, if you imagine putting this on as a movie or something, this guy, you hear it from over behind a desk that we're going to eliminate the strings from the puppet to set them free, essentially. To not be controlled, which has its own kind of meaning there. And then we move on to the next. I have this highlighted in my open pages. Here we go. Nope, it's not. Anyway, the quote in the story, and I find it in my copy of the paper, is human beyond human, warm beyond warm, love beyond love, to describe grandmother. Human beyond human, warm beyond warm, love beyond love. We'll see if I can find one when we come back to it here in a minute. But we're going to move on. I can't find one there. Right, here we get the big moment of the exploration of what grandmother is. And that is where they are sitting at the table. Someone asked, and this is kind of a good moment to kind of point this out, was why the changing her face to look like that. We now know that people tend to like people who look like them. I was listening to something, interesting enough, before I ever read the story. I was listening to something, I believe it was on NPR, where they were talking about studies they've done NPR. They're always talking about scientific studies, behavioral studies, that kind of thing. And looking at the way babies react, and this idea of inherited look is there as a functional, so that babies latch on to and they like and they want to look at people who look like them. We just naturally do that. And so I think it is that wonderful element that the grandmother's not completely changing her uh, physiology. She is very subtly doing it so that we see in her some element of resemblance to ourselves, of our heritage, to make it family. And that is part of the reason why we are so connected, according to this researcher I listened to on NPR. So connected with family is because of that resemblance we have, that we just kind of naturally gravitate to that. And I think that's just really on Bradbury's part. Um, and I don't know the full history of that research. You know, if it was around when Bradbury was writing this, or maybe he read something, or to kind of let him in on that, or maybe he just figured that out on his own. I don't know, but that's why. That's the psychological reason why. Um, so we ask, we get to the point you ask what I am, right? Uh, Mrs. Father asked, "How do you do it?" he asked at last, putting down the cutlery and looking across the table at this remarkable creature, this device. It's an interesting thing. We start with remarkable creature, animal, generally. This device, machine. This what? Woman? Question mark. Grandma took his regard and ours and held them simply in her now empty hands as gifts, and just as gently replied, "I am given things which I then give to you. I don't know what that I give, but the giving goes on. You ask what I am. Why, I'm a machine. But even in that answer we know, don't we? More than a machine. I am all the people who thought of me, and planned me, and built me, and set me running. So I am people. I am all the things they wanted to be, and perhaps could not be. So they built a great child, a wondrous toy, to represent those things." And so in this essence, we get grandmother explaining what she is, but we also get Ray Bradbury commenting on technology. That technology essentially is an expression of who we are. And so when she says, "So I am people, I am the creation of people, I am them. I am a fulfillment of their hopes and dreams and wishes come to life." And this is a far more positive view of technology than you'll find in a lot of sci-fi, uh, especially for this time. And Ray Bradbury wrote some very anti-technology sci-fi as well. But here we get kind of another perspective, this idea that technology is just an expression of who we are. It is part of us. It is not foreign. It is organic to who we are, which again speaks back to kind of the way Bradbury made it seem as less artificial as possible. And then we turn in there to where Agatha just kind of loses it. It is after grandmother says, "If paying attention is love, I am love. If knowing is love, I am love." And so this idea of love, and we get this kind of explanation of grandmother being this collection of all their experiences and memories, etc. And then Agatha, like I said, loses it. Agatha says, "She said, but lie." Father says, "Agatha." The grandmother says, "She?" And here comes Agatha. "Mother," came the shriek. "Said, I love you. Lies. Love you. Lies. And you're like her. You lie. But you're empty anyway. So that's a double lie. I hate her. Now I hate you." And this is where she runs out the door. And so we get this great realization at this moment of the story that Agatha is like incredibly angry. Agatha's kind of been in the background of each of things as they progress through the story. Once grandmother comes alive, and we thought maybe she just didn't trust the machine, like she wasn't connecting. No, found out at this point, no, that wasn't it at all. She's just so incredibly angry at her mother for dying. that she just assumes that this grandmother, who cares if you're machining? If you're telling me you love me, you're telling me you're not going anywhere, just like mother did. You lied, she lied, I hate you all. And so she runs out to the street, almost gets hit by a car, and then, of course, the grandmother gets hit instead. And this is where the big realization thing comes next, where grandmother gets up and goes, "You're dead. The car, yeah, hit me. Yeah, great. I'm fine. It's fine." And Agatha says, "I thought you were." And Grandma says, "And only natural. I mean, anyone else hit like that, tossed like that, but oh, my dear Agatha, not me. And now I see why you were afraid and never trusted me." And then grandmother talks about a book of child raising back in the day, laughed at by some few people years back, where the woman who wrote the book said, as final advice to parents, "Whatever you do, don't die. Your children will never forgive you." "Forgive," some one of us whispered. "For how can children understand when you just up and go away and never come back again? No excuse, no apologies, no sorry, no nothing." And this is where the story changes from a story really about technology to a story about grief. And we kind of realize at this point that the story has kind of always been about grief. The technology aspect was really just kind of almost a distraction to some degree of kind of suspense, thinking something is about to happen with technology, but no, in reality, it's about humanity and our grief with each other, dealing with each other, and how we kind of forgive people for dying on us. So it's a great scene. It's a great moment there with Agatha and grandmother. And grandmother says, "I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here forever." Okay. And then we get right to the very end, where "We shall inhabit the nursery again. Never fear," grandmother tells them, because this is where she's going to. They're going to grow old. She's going to leave, and nowhere will come back. And of course, the kids cry, "We will never be old. That will never happen. Never, never." And of course, we all know that not to be true. But in childhood, it's hard to think that you'll always be young. But no, one day you will be old. And of course, at the end, grandmother returns to the house, put back on the lawn, and then they get the golden key, and they decide, will it dearly fit? Which is a great moment. Will she fit back in our lives? Which fits. So let's take a look at some of the questions. I see lots of them before we move on to the things here. Let's see. So can we assume that grandma is a human just because she was being created by human, talk, think, and function like a human? She's not human. She is a machine. The question becomes then, a machine created by humans, does it retain some of the essence of humanity in it? And the more complex the machine, how much of that humanity is retained? And I think that's a really interesting question, especially for today, given the kind of explosion in the last, 6 months, year, of artificial intelligence. How much of that is human versus how much is purely machine with none of our essence in it? And I think that's largely a philosophical question, not one that there is a definitive answer on. But I think that, no, so you can't treat her as human, but there is that question in the story about how much of that humanity is retained in it. How much of it is our memories, our experiences, and just a pure record of our memories, does that constitute enough of our experience to then be considered at least somewhat human? How come the other two children, Tim and Tom, had an easier time accepting the grandma? I don't know if the story ever deals with that. I think maybe there is an essence of age there, that Agatha's the youngest, that the way grandmother attached herself or gained the confidence of the boys was different. They had more time with their mother. I could only speculate at that point, other than that's what Ray Bradbury wanted, which is really a cop-out answer of any or literature analysis. That's the way the author wanted it. But that would be my interpretation. Uh, which, yeah, had they known their mother was short. Um, but sometimes the youngest in a family responds to the death of a parent much differently than the older. So I don't know. Everyone responds to grief differently. And in this case, the boys kind of didn't go towards anger, whereas Agatha did. I don't know if there's really any reason to that. Uh, so, okay, so Tim and Tom are older, somewhat more mature, so maybe it's not necessarily that they were okay with their mother's death, but because they understand why she gone, they just want to get it. And I think yes, I think that may be also good, very derogatory. That they're a little older, they're able to process a little bit more maturely. Again, they're still children, but there is a certain age where you can process death a little easier than if you're very young. You can at least understand some essence of the way the world works, right? That it wasn't their mother's fault that she died. Whereas a younger child may lean towards that was a choice the person made, even if they're not consciously thinking that. So we're treading into psychology here, which is not my area of expertise. Great. Well, that is the end of I Sing the Body Electric. Now, I did want to talk very briefly about the other story that you have in there that I think has a lot of connections with, and that is Moxon's Master, the Ambrose Bierce story. I have not read as much Ambrose Bierce as I have Bradbury. But after reading Moxon's Master, I think one of the interesting things you can do here is read these two stories together. If you haven't already read either one of them, make sure you read them in close proximity to each other, because I think they're talking about artificial intelligence and the creation of man in two very different ways. And there's some really interesting compare and contrast elements that can be made here. And if I were on the National Testing Committee, which I would not want to be, if I were, I could definitely see writing an essay comparing and contrasting the way Bierce versus Bradbury deals with the topic of artificial intelligence, essentially artificial life. I think so. I pay close attention there because they approach it very differently. Obviously, the creations are very different, and obviously the outcomes are also very different, vastly different in the story. I'm not going to spoil Moxon's Master for you if you haven't read it yet. They're very different. So I would maybe be great as a team thing, create a T-chart comparing and contrasting these. Yeah. All right. So that brings us to the end of the evening. So thank you for being here. I'm so happy that you attended, and I hope these 3 sessions were very helpful. If not, explaining everything in Blade of Heaven and this story, which I didn't attempt to do, but at least kind of getting you on the right track of enjoying these pieces, because I think USAD did a very good job choosing the lit pieces and getting interested in them and figuring out what you need to study for each one of them and prepare yourself for that first lit exam coming. So please make sure that you follow. Every time I do one of these, there's always a few follows afterwards, and I always appreciate it. Follow Academic TX in Twitter and Instagram. And yes, go ahead and follow USAD sites as well, because they have some good stuff coming as well. So thank you again for being here. I hope all of you have a great night. And if you're in here and if you enjoyed these talks, feel free to, if you have other ideas of other talks that you'd like us to host later on in the year about subjects or topics in the guide, or things we could talk, or discussions we can have, feel free to shoot those to us. Let us know. We're all about creating as much content as possible to kind of help you get the guys out throughout the year, and also just to make it as enjoyable of a program as humanly possible.
Thank you and good night.